Rúben Amorim, could he be the man to replace the one and only Pep Guardiola? Because if he is, he's got an incredible job on his hands. But I do think Manchester City could be onto something, if the rumours are to be believed, of course, that Manchester City are very much interested in targeting Rúben Amorim as the potential replacement for Pep Guardiola. So what I wanted to do in this video was take a little bit of a deep dive into Rúben Amorim, see what he's all about, what are his tactics like, how does it fare to be the next man to follow Pep Guardiola, as well as look at the potential comparisons that people are going to bring to the table as well. Who are the up-and-coming managers that City could target as an alternative? Who are the already established managers that Manchester City could target? And what are their points per match ratio in comparison to Rúben Amorim? I'm going to give you all of that, so stick around to find out what that is, because it's very interesting and gives me a lot of confidence as to what Manchester City are doing. But let's start with the man himself and the tactics. He's 39 years old, so incredibly young. He's got a big future ahead of him. Last season, the tactics were predominantly a 3-4-3 with a very versatile structures in place, with a very low build-up play. They love to occupy the central areas. Sounds familiar. Sounds awfully familiar to those Manchester City fans that are familiar with Pep Guardiola, of course. And those tactics that he uses are fantastic, and it earned them 3 goals per game last season. 3 goals per game, mate. That's pretty impressive. And the more I dive deeper into Rúben Amorim's record at Sporting Lisbon, in particular the last 2 years, with them currently sat top, winning 8 out of 8 matches so far this season, last season being the champions as well, they're on a great run of form right now. And I think Rúben Amorim at the helm of that is a lot of the reason why. Now you bring in the clues as to why this might be the case. First of all, his contract expires in 2026. So I think that gives us 2 clues. One, I think Pep Guardiola is likely to extend. I think that will probably be 1 more year of Pep Guardiola. That's my prediction, at least, with the rumours coming out of the club that I'm hearing, is that the likeliness is he is going to extend, whether it's for 1 year, for 2 years, that hasn't been announced yet. But it sounds likely that he could be extending for at least 1 more year. I think it will be 1 more year, and then the contract expiring in 2026 sort of works out perfectly for the idea of Rúben Amorim. The man himself has been targeted by Liverpool. Obviously, he decided to stay at Sporting Lisbon for the foreseeable, and they targeted Arne Slot as an alternative, who is someone I'm going to compare to as well later on into this video, to have a look at the points per match ratio of those 2 managers, as well as a number of others, which is exciting to look at. But tactically, I think that the system's very similar to Manchester City. There are subtle differences. The use of wing-backs at Sporting Lisbon, predominantly, because they dominate the ball so often, the possession is often Sporting Lisbon's throughout the majority of the game. Very similar to Manchester City. What we would call traditional wing-backs, I mean, on paper, ultimately they're wingers. They get forward so much, but their weaknesses are space in behind, which is also very, very familiar. Manchester City fans are all too familiar with that, and something that drives me insane. Even though I love Pep Guardiola, I get a little bit annoyed, to be honest. The amount of counter-attacks that we're susceptible to, it's pretty frustrating seeing the amount of one chance for the opposition, 1 goal for the opposition, because of the freedom of the pitch that we afford them if we lose the ball. But ultimately, they keep the ball, Sporting Lisbon, and they dominate that division right now, as well as Manchester City. So I think it's exciting times. The difficult side for any manager now is following Pep Guardiola. And as you've seen in the thumbnail already, is he the next Pep? You know, I'm already comparing him. And that's, people might not like that, but that's what's instinctive. You know, you're following the act of Pep Guardiola. We've seen other football clubs do exactly the same. You look at the likes of Arsenal, for example, who I actually think they did a reasonable job of following the act of Arsene Wenger, but the act wasn't as loved. Half of the Emirates Stadium were holding up banners to get Wenger out, if you remember that. So the welcoming of a new manager was a little bit easier. He took to the water a little bit easier compared to the likes of Ferguson, who no Manchester United fan wanted to see the back of. They all wanted him to stay. And I think if you speak to Manchester City fans, they all want Pep to stay for forever. Just forever. Die in the Etihad, mate. Just don't go anywhere. You're not going anywhere. I'll just handcuff him to the stadium until he dies, basically. That's what Manchester City fans want. A little bit harsh, but ultimately, that's what City fans want. If you look at the transition of managers for Arsenal as well, and how difficult it can be, you know, you brought in Unai Emery, which I think at the time, it deemed to be a stupid decision and wasn't good enough. But look at him now. Look at Unai Emery now. I think Arsenal fans wouldn't may consider that to be a bit of a mistake. He's been a thorn in their side as the Aston Villa manager as well, taking points off them numerous times, costly points as well. That then followed with, it was actually Freddie Ljungberg, who I met in a toilet once. Short little anecdote there for you. I met Freddie Ljungberg at my granddad's funeral, the party after it. There wasn't a party, but it wasn't a celebration, but you know what I mean, the after thing, after a funeral, and I was having a piss with Freddie Ljungberg, and I got his autograph. I was about 12, I remember that. Anyway, Freddie Ljungberg, he was a little caretaker. And then, of course, Mikel Arteta. He came in and is doing a reasonably good job. Not any Premier League titles to speak of yet, but that's because a certain Pep Guardiola and Manchester City are in the way, unfortunately. So, yeah, Mikel Arteta's coming in, and I mean, they're back into the heydays of Arsenal, let's call it, where they're at least challenging for silverware. But you look at the way Alex Ferguson left, Moyes coming in and looking for that Scottish, like that, the emotion, the hard-nosed Scotsman, trying to follow the footsteps of Alex Ferguson there, the passion of that Scotsman. Didn't work. Tactically barren, to be honest. Tactically inept and not good enough at all. Giggs, fan favourite, getting him fan favourite just to steady the ship a little bit, didn't work. Van Gaal, bringing in a very defensive, pragmatic-minded manager, and then you bring in Mourinho, who I would argue is along the same lines of getting the job done type manager, but a very hot-headed, poor man manager in truth. And then you get Solskjaer in. A very attack-minded manager, someone who just throws everything, throws the kitchen sink at the opposition, doesn't really bother about the other end of the pitch though, not neglects the defensive side of the game all too easily. And I mean, again, a completely change in style. You know, that's ultimately what Manchester United have gone to. Then they followed with another fan favourite, Michael Carrick. Then you bring in, going back to the pragmatism, or the German pragmatism of Ralf Rangnick. And now eventually at the sort of possible middle ground. I mean, what is Erik ten Hag? What is he? What style is Erik ten Hag? He kind of encapsulates Manchester United. And that is the point. It's the styles of managers that they've gone through has been completely different. Whereas you look at the first thing Manchester City are doing is trying to emulate what Pep Guardiola has achieved. Even before Pep, you look at Mancini, a very attack-minded, possession-based manager. Pellegrini along the same lines. Pep Guardiola needed to uproot a few things, fullbacks ultimately, with Gaël Clichy and Bakary Sagna. But you look at what Pep did, a lot of the possession-based midfield was there for him. You know, there wasn't too much to uproot for Pep Guardiola. Ultimately, the defence is what he actually needed to change, possession-based defenders. And now you look at Rúben Amorim, the same. It's going to be exactly the same. A manager that likes to build up from the back, using the goalkeeper as an extra man more often than not as well. So it's very, very similar. Then you factor in Hugo Viana. Again, Manchester City planning, looking ahead, looking at what success has happened at Manchester City with Cheeky and Pep. That team, that bond that those two had, the friendship, off the pitch friendship was there. It was good and it worked. And the team ethic was brilliant between those two, and it achieved ultimately a big pile of silverware. And that's what they're looking to do again, having that bond between sporting director and manager, as those two need to be shaking hands and be on the same page at all times throughout the course of the season. It's so important for those two to be on the same page and swimming in the same direction. You know, they absolutely need to be doing that. And that is exactly why I think Hugo Viana, it makes sense. Rúben Amorim, to me, it just makes sense. And I'm excited. And clearly City have a plan at play. The only issue for me is that it's going to be the comparisons of Pep. No one's going to achieve what Pep achieved. No one. He's a shooting star. He's a rare... He's just such a special person and a talent as a manager that we've had. And we're so fortunate to have had Pep Guardiola for so long as well, and potentially one more year. The problem is City fans' standards now, they need to be realistically lowered. Obviously, whoever it may be that I believe will be joining in 2026, if it is Rúben Amorim, we need to give him a time. Because even Pep Guardiola won nothing in his first year. It took him 1 year. People still laughed at him in his first year as being the Manchester City manager. Ultimately, they stopped laughing pretty quickly after that, didn't they? But yeah, hopefully City fans can have that patience. Me, I'm definitely going to be one of them. We need to give this man patience, whoever it is, even if it isn't Rúben Amorim. Right, now on to the other names and other potential names. Obviously, people are thinking about Xabi Alonso. I think he's on his way to Real Madrid. Vincent Kompany, I'm not even going to compare him, because I think the short spells at Burnley and now the short spells at... Bayern Munich as well. I think ultimately there's not too much data to go off there really to really analyse, because the difference in clubs as well. You're talking about Burnley, a local working man's club, championship, Premier League relegation quality. You know what I mean? Compared to Bayern Munich, an absolute juggernaut in European football. So the comparisons aren't quite fair between the two, as well as the time that he spent at both clubs. So I do think it will be interesting to see. Let's see where where Kompany is rather in 2 years. In 2026, let's see what he's done at Bayern, and then I think he'll be entered into the conversation. But right now, I'm not sure he's even in the conversation yet. One to keep an eye on, Kompany, to be honest. But the other managers, and let's have a look at the points per match. So I'm ranking these guys. So what I'm doing here is looking at currently established managers, the up-and-coming younger managers, the promising managers, as well as some retired classic managers that are considered some of the greats as well. So these are now ranked by points per match, as well as showing the number of matches that they played at the best record that they had currently at the spell that they had that was the best at that particular club. So Pep, obviously at Manchester City, his points per match was 2.34, the best on this list. It's so sad to see him go, isn't it? You can see why we've won what we've won with a points per match ratio like that. Over 483 matches. Ridiculous from Pep Guardiola. In second place, Ancelotti at Real Madrid. 2.28 points per match. In third place, Rúben Amorim. So that's not too bad. Considering the two names that are ahead of you on this list are Carlo Ancelotti and Pep Guardiola, you're in third place, mate. You know, Ancelotti, who's pretty close to retirement, Pep, who's not going to be a problem for Manchester City because he isn't going to be taking over a Premier League side. So ideally here, this man points per match ratio, obviously the fact that you're immediately going to say, hang on a minute, that's Sporting Lisbon. Yeah, that's the difference here. Can he do it in the Premier League is immediately the question. They said the same about Pep, don't forget. Can Pep do it in the Premier League? This great league of ours where Pep was ripping La Liga to shreds. He won't be able to do it in the Prem, they said. No chance. That's what they all said. Yeah, well, yeah, well done on that one. Alonso, so 100 matches he's actually played. So I think he was bordering on, is he worth comparing? Because 100 matches really is like more or less 3 seasons at that one club, close to it at least. But yeah, Alonso points per match, 2.22. So yeah, again, very impressive. Also in the Bundesliga, same can be said about him. If you're going to say the same about Amorim, you're going to say the same about the Bundesliga. Can he do it in the Premier League? Then Slot, this is at Feyenoord, by the way, so not Liverpool. At Feyenoord, he had a 2.15 over 148 matches. And Liverpool, who went for Slot after Rúben Amorim. So the Rúben Amorim connections were to Liverpool were very strong, and then they turned their attention to Slot, who has got a worse points per match ratio than Amorim has, and you'd argue the standard of league is less. You know, in the Dutch league, compared to, you got Porto and Benfica and Sporting Lisbon, there's some quality teams in Liga Portugal. So, yeah, I mean, still, he's ahead of Slot in that regard as well. Inzaghi at Inter Milan, 2.14 over 167 matches. Klopp, the mighty Jurgen Klopp, 2.07 over 489 matches. And Pep's catching him up there. He's going to overtake him as the number of matches as well, which is interesting. And the great Alex Ferguson, 2.02 over a measly 1,490 matches. He stuck around, didn't he? He stuck around, in fairness to him. So, I mean, as much as we're talking about the legacy of Pep Guardiola, what he's won is incredible. But look how long Fergie spent to win what he won. I mean, he spent, what, nearly 3 times the amount of, yeah, just over 3 times the amount of matches at Manchester United compared to Pep Guardiola. But still, 2.02 over that amount of matches isn't bad. And then, of course, Arteta, who drops below 2 points per match into 1.98. And that's over 241 matches, which is a reasonable amount of matches. So, Amorim is exciting in that regard. I think tactically, very similar. You know, it's just the whole, how do you follow Pep? How do you follow Pep? Ultimately, this excites me. It makes sense for the connection of Hugo Viana, the similarities to Pep's style of football. What do you think, Blues? Do you think this is the right man to replace Pep Guardiola? Get in the comments below. Let us know your thoughts. Like and subscribe to Typical City, and I'll see you in the next one.
This is Typical City now, holding up Silverwood.